Welcome back to the Sport Techie Pro Day, reopening sports venues, presented by Samsung. This is our featured panel discussion of the afternoon, reopening challenges from across the U.S. I'm honored to have our three guests here. Jen Compton, the Vice President of Innovation for the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Rob Matwick, the Executive Vice President of Business Operations for the Texas Rangers. And Lee Zeidman, President of Staples Center, Microsoft Theater, and LA Live. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
for having us.
Yeah. So Rob has the inside track on this because he's actually had fans in his building. And so the question to start with you, when you realized it was going to be possible to host some fans in Texas this year, how do you begin to prepare for that in these unique circumstances?
Well, there was certainly no playbook, and each of us knows that, from where we were in March, that we've all been trying to figure it out as we go. Typically, when you get into a postseason, too, Major League Baseball comes in. We literally have a postseason manual that we follow pretty closely. But this was like nothing I've ever done in the 40 years I've been in this business. From the protocols which we had during the regular season for player health and safety, now carrying those forward into a sort of a bubble scenario here, not only the players, but their families. We had Major League Baseball staff that literally was with us embedded here the last week of the regular season as a lead-in, even though we hosted the division series with no fans, prior to getting to the league championship and World Series. They were with us essentially for 2 weeks before we got to fans. So there was no script, really a lot of work on the fly, if you will, but tremendous collaboration between our community, our public health here in Arlington, the fire department, city public health department, Major League Baseball, and then everybody on the Ranger staff to pull together to get it done. And certainly the teams, umpires, our players. It's a testament to their commitment to following the protocols to be able to keep them safe. And then we instituted mitigation strategies that we felt would keep our fans safe. But I will say there was a lot of apprehension going into the first game of the league championship with the Braves and the Dodgers for the first time we opened those doors. And not only COVID, but it was a new building. So there were a lot of challenges, but we pulled together and got it done. And I'm glad to say that it was a good outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the optimist would say at least you didn't have any entrenched routines of ways of doing things prior to this. But were there, before we get to the others, were there one or two areas that you felt that you wanted to put the most emphasis on?
Well, I because it was also new, I think the communication up front was critical. And that started with, from the time a person considered making a ticket purchase, informing them of what the protocols were going to be when they got to the building, following it up with email blasts and communication on our social media channels, our website, doing everything that we could in advance so that people could be well informed before they even, started their journey or thought about starting their trip to the ballpark. And that included an overriding message that, frankly, if you don't feel well, we'd like you to stay home. And that's, easy for me to say because I'm not the person who's gone into my wallet and spent the money to purchase tickets. But, that was something, and I can't tell you how many media interviews I did ahead of the league championship, but that was one of the overriding messages in addition to the mitigation strategies we took at the ballpark. But if you didn't feel well, it was imperative that you not come to the ballpark and potentially get anyone else sick. So I think that messaging on the front end can't be understated. And then when you got to the ballpark, I mean, we were joking in the few days leading up to it that if you stood still for too long, somebody was going to hang a sign on your back, whether it was protocols or how to dine safely in a COVID environment, mask required. We have PA systems around the entries to each of the ballpark entries. So we had messaging there, scoreboards. I mean, everywhere we could hit it, we did. And but I really think the advanced messaging was critical, so that people knew what they were getting into when they got here.
Mm-hmm. And Jen, up in Boston, where do you stand? And obviously the NBA season now has a start to the schedule. NHL sometime thereafter. You get to have two tenants, so to speak. How do things stand?
Hopeful, but I think just also realistic. So, we know that the teams are, we're sprinting, I think, towards that NBA date. At the same time, the state of Massachusetts, where indoor or just venues, large venues stand is in their phase 4 planning. And that's phase 4 is when there's a vaccine. We are working with our city officials, state officials, seeing what's possible. I think if you were following, the Patriots, and even Red Sox, they were petitioning to, get approval to have limited fans in. And, I think the timing just didn't work out for the Red Sox. On the Patriot side, I think the group had to throw in the towel. I think the state, rates weren't going in the right direction. They were getting towards the end of the season. Again, we're hopeful that, or, we feel confident that we could host, limited fans in a really safe way, but just have to figure out when it's right for Massachusetts and Boston.
Mm-hmm. I think the fans were probably pretty lucky while watching that torrential downpour Sunday night that they weren't in attendance. And Lee, and so we're going to keep doubling the degree of difficulty from 1 team to 2, and now you have 4 teams who get to play at Staples Center. How do things stand in Los Angeles?
Well, they're not very good. And I can tell you this is day 240 without hosting an event at Staples Center. So what does that tell you? Back on March 12th, we thought when the NBA shut down and then the rest of the leagues followed, that it was probably a 3, 4, 5 week process. Everybody be back playing. Then we quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. So we kind of adapted a 4-prong approach. And the first one was to figure out how we were going to work with city, state, and county, because there were going to need to be guidelines and protocols. And so we knew that they were going to be tied into flattening the curve, making sure the frontline healthcare workers were being protected and the hospitals weren't being overrun by COVID cases. So we started working on protocols and guidelines that would allow us to host events without fans first, and then with fans, dependent upon where we got with the state and the city and the county. We felt we needed to educate both, all three, the state, the city, and the county, because, like I said, they were focusing on other things. Once we realized we were going to put these guidelines together, we determined we were going to need to reinvent the fan journey, A, and B, we were going to have to take a look at the venue from top to bottom to figure out how we were going to go contactless, how we were going to make it frictionless, and how we were going to make it easy and safe and sanitized for people to want to come back to sporting events or musical events. From that, we determined a budget that would allow us to do all things. And then we realized these guidelines, A to Z, our own, had to marry up with state, county, and city guidelines, their A to Z guidelines. And then eventually the leagues and the teams would come calling with their guidelines. So we realized that at some point, and it's happening right now with the NBA starting probably preseason on the 11th of December, that we needed to marry all these guidelines together to make sure we were prepared from a venue standpoint. And then our last piece was communication. We needed to communicate to the county, to the city, and to the state that we were prepared. This is what we were going to do to protect the general public. We need to communicate to our staff that we were safe, and this is what we were going to do to protect them. And then we needed to communicate to the leagues and the teams that this is what we were going to do, and we were ready to accept their protocols. And then finally, we need to, once we get to that point in the state of California, in the county of Los Angeles, communicate to our fans. Right now, we are nowhere close as it relates to an indoor arena in having the ability to host fans. There is no tier in California or LA County that allows us to host any kind of capacities. So we're working again with the county on trying to come up with those, with the state to come up with those. They just released guidelines for outdoor stadiums, but it takes an outdoor stadium the ability to get into tier 4 in order for them to do reduced capacities. And those who follow what's going on nationwide, the state of California and our county, everybody took a step back, and pretty much all 40 counties right now are in tier 1 right now.
Sounds daunting, but at least there's a lot of organization and the work being put in now. So hopefully you can turn that corner. And Rob, you mentioned the advanced messaging. I'd like to hear more about what the guest journey was like once someone actually arrives at the ballpark. What did the gates look like? What the means of egress and the concourse. How did it all go?
Lee touched on a piece of it, which was related to cashless and as much as possible a touchless environment. So all of the parking this year, even though we'd primarily gone away from cash at the parking lots, this year we We just excluded it. So you had to either have a pre-purchased barcode that we could scan, or be prepared to do a card transaction with the guest handling their card, inserting it into a machine, and then removing it once it was approved. But we strongly encourage pre-purchase on parking so that our attendant at the lot would just scan a barcode and keep the vehicles moving. When we got to the gates, obviously we distanced our magnetometers for metal detection. We didn't allow bags other than, diaper bags for kids, or parents with their young kids, or for medical reasons. So that was another change for us because, we have allowed bags previously. So there was a no bag policy on entering the stadium, distance magnetometers, and then markers literally on the ground and on the concourses to try to have social distancing as we queued. Prop doors. Well, before you prop the door, with the new building, we do have pedestals now for our ticket scanning. So like you do when you board a plane, if you have the barcode on your phone, you can put it on the reader and do it yourself. So we had attendants there to assist guests with scanning the barcodes, but that was a part of the process that the guests actually handled themselves. So they would scan the codes for the folks that were with them in their party, limiting to pods of 4. So after they got past ticket pedestal, we had doors propped so that someone did not have to touch a door to enter the building. And then once they got into the concourse, we immediately had a line of hand sanitizing units. And we actually used we took them out of portable stands, some 3-compartment sinks that we spread throughout the ballpark too, for hand wash stations. So I think we had close to 100 hand sanitizing stations spread throughout the building and another 20 or so hand wash stations. So that was sort of the process to get in. We tried to do everything that we could to mitigate touch. We learned this from the Cowboys. Cowboys had their first regular season game on September 20th while we were still in our regular season without fans. We tie wrapped or zip tied over 30,000 seats in the building so that to try to help maintain the seat integrity, ticket integrity, you had a pod of 4, but any other seats adjacent to you, in front, behind, or next to you were zip tied so that they physically could not be put down. So that was another step that we did in the week leading up to the league championship series when we first had fans in the building. A little bit of an investment on the zip ties, but in the labor, but we felt like it would help us and easy to identify for guest service staff. And that, a pod of 4, if there appeared to be a 5th person, then it immediately drew attention to it where we could go down and have a discussion with the person. And then, social distancing at restrooms, at concession stands. The cashless piece did carry over to our partners at Delaware North and Jen's parent company there. So we installed reverse ATM machines prior to the league championship. So guests could go up there, insert cash, and get a loaded Visa card, which was then good inside the building or away from the building. We wanted that to be a real plus in terms of the experience for guests. So every transaction at concession stands went cashless too. So from parking to tickets to concessions, we were not handling any cash and tried to keep everything in the hands of the consumer as much as we could.
Mm-hmm. Texas, haven't been to the new one, but certainly been to the old one, and you have plenty of space, sprawling parking lots. And Jen, in Boston, you're not only in downtown Boston, you're above a train station. So with that extra layer of complexity, how have you started mapping out the guest journey?
Yeah, I think maybe to Lee's point too, just really you're looking at it with all fresh eyes, and that's a good thing, right? For those of us that have been in the industry a while, I've been in my role for about 16 years. There are a lot of things that maybe we had always wanted to implement, or we're getting a little traction, but we're like, this is an opportunity maybe to cash in on some of these initiative investments we've made, and some of those, back to we had moved cashless about 3 or 4 seasons ago. That's underway. Massachusetts requires that you still have an alternative, but we're 85% cashless. Mobile ticketing. We wanted to go 100% mobile. We've been stuck at 80%, and this is going to push us over the edge. But specifically to your question, yeah, our footprint's always tricky. It requires that we're coordinating with MBTA and Transit Police and Boston Police, and now we're on top of also the Hub on Causeway, which is our entertainment district. Not really bustling right now, just based on how all mixed use venues, I guess, would be doing. But what's really important to us is the gates and getting that right. We've never, get really, smallest, probably 2-team arena in the country, and we don't have the ability to walk around it and enter in. We've always said, wouldn't it be great if we had a gate A, B, C, and D? Like, you come in this side. And, we are looking at, we've kind of developed a way that we're opening up entrances that we've never used before, that we're kind of dump out backside exits for fans. And now those are going to be kind of proper entries, and that we're going to assign your entry. What we're trying to do is, we split the arena in half, East Hemisphere, West Hemisphere. So on the loge level, you'll have 2 neighborhoods, balcony, 2 neighborhoods, and then, our premium levels would kind of operate as their own. But, you would come in with your neighborhood through your gate. It's some of it's not as convenient. We're sending people down, a long walkway. They've got to, maybe it's 4 flights of stairs, or they could have taken escalators. So there's pros and cons. We're gonna, I think this is our planned approach, and the idea is that we need to, we can certainly test it, but we're gonna have to iterate once we're up and running is the plan.
Mm-hmm. And Lee, same question for you, and I certainly know that each team is probably going to want to have their own slightly different protocol. So how are you working through all that?
Well, I will tell you this. The NBA has now released 8 protocols for the restart of the NBA season. So we're in constant communication with both NBA teams right now to figure out how we're going to do those, because neither the Lakers or Clippers ever wanted to do anything the same in our venue. That said, we are also waiting for the NHL to release their restart protocols so we can incorporate those as well. And they're just in the survey mode right now. We hope to have some protocols from them. Our biggest challenge is we need to make sure that there is some consistency with all 3 teams. And then once the WNBA starts playing in May, that they follow along suit as well, because we don't want to be in a situation where we have to retrain our staff in 4 different ways, even though the protocols are similar, just to meet the needs of the brands and the teams. So that's going to be the biggest challenge. There's been a lot of discussion about, staggered times coming in certain doors, how you're going to load people in. We don't have to worry about fans just yet, but I can tell you on a Friday night in downtown Los Angeles with the Lakers playing the Clippers, you're not going to stagger people coming into the building and think that they're going to get to those times. We will be able to do that with staff, because we probably estimate that we will have roughly 300 people with both teams in the building. By both teams, I mean home and away, when we open up with events without fans. So we're going to be able to designate doors. We're going to be able to designate areas, certain zones, working with the NBA. There is a lot of that type of stuff that is out there right now. And I think the biggest thing is now, and I'm sure most of the people at this conference who are in the venue business or with the teams have been inundated with various tech opportunities, this type of thermometer, this type of tablet, this type of chemical, this type of piece of equipment to clean. I think for the first 4 or 5 months, most of us just vetted that, and we could have done that for a living outside of being on task forces. I used to say I should just start a task force that oversees all the task forces that I'm on, just to be able to make sure I knew where I was. That said, I think, and to be honest with you, we received a lot of that because it was new and it was changing. Now I think that we have a good idea what this virus is, what it does, and how we're going to have to deal with it. And for those of us who work in indoor venues, I believe it's going to come down to the HVAC. There's going to be a lot of emphasis put on that as it relates to the NBA and the NHL. And if you have ice, if you don't have ice, you're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that moving forward, because of how the airborne particles are moved around. So to finish, it's there's a lot of things still, and it's coming fast. I used to tell people, where did the summer go? And it just feels like we just had a 9-month summer vacation. In California, it's not raining. It was 80 here yesterday, so I have a little bit of advantage of some nice weather. But the summer's over, and with or without fans, these leagues are going to start. And we as venue operators or team executives, we need to be ready for two opportunities, one without fans and then with fans. And we need to educate, and educate.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you're auditioning to be a Sport Techie consultant there. Actually, Rob, do you have something to that?
Yeah, well, we got that question about timed ingress or gates. We did print recommended entries into our building, and of course, because of the tier structure among the MLB staff, our tier 1, tier 2 people had to be segregated because of our player and staff testing protocols from our fans and non-tiered people like myself who were out working it. So, we did try to recommend to people, but what we found, and I'm sure Lee and Jen can both appreciate this because of our entertainment piece, 70% of our guests entered on the north side of the building because it's next to Texas Live. So they wanted to go either get something to eat or drink or hang out with friends there, even though we're trying to mitigate large crowds. And Live had instituted its own distancing protocols for the venue. But, just because fans like to come early and do other things, 70% of them, even based upon recommendation, all came in that north entrance. And then on egress, too, the other question we got asked a lot was, were you going to time egress? And we had 64 high school graduations from May through early July, and we did so many of them at the ballpark because we could distance, we could open the roof for air circulation. So we had a little bit of practice. What we found on egress, we tried to do the dismissal by sections there. Worked great for the students because they had the teachers hanging over them. Unfortunately for guests, mom and dad and brother and sister and family members that were in attendance, everybody moves at a different speed. And then invariably you get to the top of to the concourse at the top of the aisle, and somebody wants to stop and take a picture, somebody needs to use the restroom. People move at different speeds. So we found that trying to time the egress sounds good in theory. We didn't find it to be very practical. And for baseball, we had 11,500 people spread over 4 levels, all levels of the building. So we felt like there was enough space on the concourses, and people did tend to gravitate back to that north entrance because of the things to do post event. But we weren't overly concerned about it. We only had 1 or 2 instances over 13 games where it got a little crowded out there at the entry, and most of that was because MLB Network had a set up near that entrance, and a lot of people just wanted to hang out and watch the guys talking about World Series games.
Mm-hmm. The follow up on Lee's point about vetting all the technologies, and I'm curious as to which ones each of you might have adopted, and also I know we're going to hear from the Yokohama DNA Bay Stars a little bit later, and they had up to about 90% capacity, and one of the things that they included that really interested me was they had carbon dioxide detectors, figuring that that's sort of a proxy for the way that the air particles are moving. And so anytime that if you were exhaling, there'd be carbon dioxide. If there was virus in the air, that's where it would be, which got me thinking, a little bit more about what you say about the HVAC. What are some of these high-tech gadgetry that you may be including, or maybe none of the ones that came to your attention worth pursuing?
I would say, I think the ones early, just all about the touch surfaces, and this can kind of disinfect itself, and it's it's a sticker you put on things, as the virus and our understanding of it evolved, a lot of those just kind of got put on the back burner. And thermal cameras, like we can all, that was a month of vetting, and, that seems to have gone by the wayside as well. I'd say one that piques my interest, certainly testing. We could talk about that. There could just be panels all day about it. And it's a really hot topic. So, we've got to let the leagues take the lead for us for now. But just contact tracing, I think, is interesting. If you have staff, because if you do have an incident, you just don't really want to be reliant on, one, doing manual labor and going back and watching videos and where was that person. Second, their recollection of who they might have been in contact with. We're certainly going to give policies, but the wearables, ones that could maybe kind of not have to be charged for, could live 60 days on the back of a credential, I find really interesting. And that would be a solid investment for me and our staff and peace of mind.
So we're actually, listen, we vetted quite a bit, as you can imagine. Some of our partners are Clear. We're working on a health pass with Clear. Contact tracing is huge. It's a big mandate from not only the state of California, but the county of Los Angeles for us. And it's going to be big with the NBA and the NHL as well. As it relates to, air purification, air sanitization, we're fortunate enough that we had installed previously a a product called Atmos Air that cleans the air for us. Another piece of technology, Blue Eco, that actually controls the humidity, allows us to even make water out of the air, things of that nature. But I think some of the biggest things that we're doing, and we're not doing anything that anybody else is not doing, nor that anybody's thought about. We're all going touchless to a certain extent. We're going to be cashless. We're going to be digital. We're going to be digital ticketing. We are working with, similar to the concept that the Denver Broncos Stadium that Jay Roberts talked about. They're using Zip-In. We're looking at just walkout technology by Amazon, because we're going to do something with our concourse concession stands. One of the interesting things in the state of California, when they allow the venues, the stadiums to open up, there will be no concessions on the concourse. Everything must be mobile ordered, which I don't know how that's going to work as you increase the capacities. And we're going to put our flag in the sand as it relates to that on indoor arenas, because there's no way we're going to be able to do mobile ordering and get that food out to everybody as you ramp up your capacities. But I think first and foremost, the big thing to do is work closely with the county, work closely with your city, and work closely with the state, because you don't want to go out there and buy all these technologies when at the end of the day, they are either obsolete, or you're not going to be required to use them. And, Jen and I talked about this a little bit earlier. There's a lot of theater hygiene out there, and a lot of the things that we're going to do, put attendance in restrooms, make sure people are visible in bright, vests and things of that nature, cleaning the concourses and cleaning the floors. A lot of that is theater hygiene, but it needs to be done to assuage the fears of the general public and your staff coming back.
Yeah, we did some of that with dedicated cleaning crews. And that's all they did was go through, wipe down handrails, wipe down stainless. So that is a big part of it. And Lee, you're right. It does need to be done, whether or not it's really disinfecting for the virus or not. It does need to be done, and it's a good practice for sure. Anything I think you can get onto a person's phone is valuable. So as much as we could hit that mobile device, I think it's beneficial. I will tell you, though, one of the most effective things we did, probably subconsciously, but after the second game of the league championship series, we had a conversation with our scoreboard operators, and we implored them, and they did a great job from game 3 forward for the rest of the postseason, was to only put people on the scoreboard between innings that were wearing masks. And because we were treating each game in the league championship and World Series as that respective team's home game, we were looking for fans in any of the Braves or Dodgers or Rays or Dodgers gear. And what was interesting over time is that we'd show a group, let's say, of 4 Dodger fans, maybe 3 of them had their masks on and 1 didn't, and you could see it click in the 4th person's mind, and they would put the mask up. Now, we didn't stay on them long if they didn't have the masks, but for the first 2 games that we were back in here, they were just showing fans, in team gear having a good time. But when we made that, flip that switch, I think it really made an impact in the stands. We had great compliance, and our strategies were mitigation. City of Arlington's been imploring us to use the 3 W's: wear a mask, watch your distance, wash your hands. We got great compliance on ingress, tremendous compliance on the concourse. Where people relax is when they sit down and start to eat. They take the food back to their seats, they sit down, and we had heard just from the NFL that, they had fans that were buying a box popcorn or a bag of peanuts. And then when security or guest service approached them to ask them to put their mask back on, they would, either, well, I've got a beer, I've got a water here, I'm eating or drinking, which under the rules is permitted, for you to lower your mask. But, that subconscious move on the scoreboards and then constant reinforcement in the stands, listen, a lot of this is just blocking and tackling. It's sort of venue 101, if you will.
You mentioned, Dodgers fans, Rays fans. What about redheaded Dodgers players who were running around the stadium when perhaps they shouldn't have been?
Well, again, that situation is being handled by Major League Baseball. So I know that, Justin returned to the clubhouse, and then, who he spoke with or where he came out onto the field, not 100% sure. I know we had staff on the field, Major League Baseball had staff on the field, MLB had staff that spoke to him when he came back up. But I also understand that, in winning a championship, I can understand how he might be sort of, overcome, to want to celebrate in that moment for sure, for something he's worked for his whole career. So tough situation. I think both sides agreed probably could have been handled better. But it was internal, to the Dodgers clubhouse.
Mm-hmm. How do each of you plan on, drawing up your seating chart? You talked to Rob about, zip tying the seats that weren't being used, but how do you even, begin the math of figuring out where people should be? Who do you consult with? How does that process look like?
Yeah, it's a huge effort. Actually, I'm curious to hear from Lee because, we have the two teams and, have both groups at the table. I think that's just been, one bright spot of this pandemic is just our working relationships. Obviously, the Bruins are our own family here, but the Celtics partnership, and it's a heavy lift. And Ticketmaster came out with some technology modeling to help you do that. You really do have to get in, and do it yourself to validate it. We're looking at tweaks to it ourselves. We're doing it's majority twos and fours, NBA coming out with, some of their requirements about, just how close to the court fans can be and or the restrictions on those folks. How are you now separating those people? There's a lot to consider. But, again, knowing, for us, I think a goal was we need to get to one manifest. We can't change it every other game and unzip tie all these seats or, so it appears we're moving in that direction, which would really help us.
Well, we're not there yet. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, we're not there yet hosting fans. But our biggest challenge with 4 teams coming into play in the building, neither of which, as I said earlier, want to do anything the same, is, if we do get into a reduced capacity situation that the state has allowed us to get in, and let's say it's 20%, we have 170 suites in our building. So is that 20% of suite owners? We have 2,600 club seats in our building. Is that 20% of club seat owners? And then you have anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 season ticket holders, depending on which team that is. So I think our biggest discussion with our teams is going to be, all right, who makes up that reduced capacity when you get to go to open up with a reduced capacity? We certainly have done manifests. We're an access ticketing building. We've done manifests for anything from 3 feet to 6 feet to various pods, things of that nature. But the big issue for us and for venues that don't own the team or the team that doesn't own the venue is, who makes up that reduced capacity? Because the teams participate in suite revenue. They participate in premier seat revenue to a certain extent. And then, part of the overall, gate, is part of rent. So there's going to be some discussions with our 4 teams as it relates to what makes up that capacity.
Yeah, our public health officials were adamant that we had a minimum 6 feet between the pods, and it was the same protocol for the Cowboys. So that sort of drove it for us. For baseball, we work with both Ticketmaster and Tickets.com, but for baseball, it's TDC, and they have a partner company, I guess, called MMC, Mobile Media Content, and we were able to give them the parameters that our public health department wanted, and then they were able to run those scenarios for us. We ran scenarios initially at 25, 37, 42, 50% of capacity back during the regular season when we thought we might be able to get up to 50% of the building. Of course, that never came to pass. But then as we got close to the postseason, we made that decision with public health to go to the pods of 4. We're able to put those parameters of 6 feet into that dynamic, and they were actually able to run and do models for us to allow us to see how we could do that effectively. Of course, Major League Baseball came back in with a 20-foot setback around the field. And then with our suites, we had to add plexiglass between, from our suites, when you step out into the seating area, they were just separated by rails or an aisle, depending on which side of the suite you were in. So we had to add plexiglass at the recommendation of public health between each of the suites to try to mitigate, any spread or dispersal between suites. And we did reduce capacity. It's interesting. We actually had public health had a larger capacity in the suites. Major League, it was about 50% of the capacity, but they were measuring based on square footage of the physical suite itself plus the seating area, which was a little more lenient. Major League Baseball came back in and actually cut that back to 25%. So they were a little more stringent than even our public health people were.
Mm-hmm. Lee, this is a question that only for you, but Lakers courtside seats have been such an important staple, pun intended, I suppose, of your events for so long. with the league, I think I saw about 30 feet back from the court. How do you cater to that crowd, the courtside crowd?
Well, fortunately, I don't have to cater to that crowd.
Right.
I just need to do the setup. That said, there is a lot of revenue tied into those courtside seats. Dr. Jerry Buss really put the showtime back in the 80s and early 90s as it relates to the Lakers and introducing the entertainment on the court, introducing those courtside seats and bringing the Hollywood element out there. You're right, 30 feet away. It's going to be very interesting, but that's the start. And as I try to tell people, your guidelines are right now, they should be living, breathing documents, because what we know today is going to be different when we get off this call, when we get out of this conference. It's going to change. So while the protocols from the NBA tell you that it's 30 feet back, they're going to need to be tested, you're clearly not going to be charging the prices that you were charging before for those, because you're not going to have the access. We can all only hope that somewhere along the line these vaccines take effect and we move forward out of this pandemic to where we get back to where we're as close to where we were before, to where people can enjoy being on the court or being close to the ice.
Mm-hmm. I would love to keep on going. We are officially at our closing time here, and hopefully at least some of our panelists might be able to join in the networking section of the Hopin platform, might be able to answer a few additional questions. But I want to give each one like a 1 minute parting thought. What else has been on your mind that you wanted to add? What else should venue operators in our audience be mindful of?
I think I've just a note of appreciation. I think the one interesting thing about our industry compared to others is that, you can call up anybody and just ask them, what exactly are you doing? They'll send you everything they know. They'll tell you everything they know. Our business, has that to its benefit. And I think that's going to get us back faster, and there's always been a great camaraderie, and it's needed now more than ever before.
Yeah, Jen, I think as well stated, my colleague Mike Healy and I did put together sort of an after action after the World Series ended, and about a week after Dave Thomas invited, typically we've been having these ballpark operations meetings. You might have 30 or 40 people on the calls. We had close to 100 for the presentation that we did in the aftermath of the World Series. But we were clear to articulate to all of our peers that, we don't have all the ideas. We're looking forward to the benefit of the 29 other teams, Major League Baseball, certainly the other leagues, everybody that we can learn from. We're all in this together. Listen, we got through it. We're very fortunate. But, we also have NFR, we've got rodeo coming up here on December 3rd. So we're getting ready to go through it again here for 10 straight days in a similar capacity. So, but that said, you're right. The communication is critical, and keeping the great ideas flowing among our peers and among ourselves is paramount.
Listen, we were the first to shut down. We're going to be the last to open, unfortunately. And my biggest concern right now is getting those 2,000 part-time workers that work 250 nights a year at Staples Center, 120 nights a year at Microsoft Theater, and all the miscellaneous events at LA Live, getting them back working. My biggest fear is that I don't know where they all are. And when we start to call them, we start to welcome them back, that they've moved on to other industries or other jobs, because some of us in this business in security or IT could have moved on. That's my biggest fear first. And then my second biggest fear is making sure that we keep them safe and that we educate them and that they know it's a safe environment. We provide them with the proper PPE and make sure that they understand how the new fan journey works and how safe and what we're doing to make sure that our venue is safe. And eventually, I tell people I'm not a Debbie Downer. I'm not a negative Nelly. I'm more of a realistic Ricky. And I think that at some point in 2021, I'm not going to make a prediction, because then I'd be just like everybody else who's out there speculating. But I think there is going to be a time when people are going to want to come back, and we're going to be ready to welcome them back, because you just can't replace the live experience, not only with your friends or your family. And I think that that's going to sustain us as we move out of this pandemic.
Very well said, Lee, and to all of our panelists. Thank you very much for being here. Jen, Rob, Lee, virtual round of applause to each of you. And thanks so much for being a part of our event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.